October 15, 1987, a private equity firm with no track record and no completed deals closes its first fund. 4 days later, the Dow Jones drops 508 points in a single session, the worst one-day crash Wall Street had ever seen. The fund survives untouched. The firm is Blackstone. The man who pushed his partners to close 4 days early, against the pull of easy momentum, is Stephen A. Schwarzman. That timing was not luck, and it did not start on Wall Street. It started years earlier in his father's drapery and bedding shop, where a teenage Schwarzman folded handkerchiefs and quietly decided something most people never let themselves believe, that building something enormous costs exactly the same effort as building something small. Somewhere between that shop and that closing date, Schwarzman crossed a line most ambitious people never find, the moment he stopped thinking in thousands and started thinking in billions. His own book, What It Takes, hands you the receipts for that transformation. It also hands you something stranger, a list of 25 personal rules for how he runs Blackstone, and buried inside that list sits a single line marked with 3 exclamation points, the only rule in the entire book written with that kind of urgency. Tonight, we are telling you exactly what it says and why he needed 3 exclamation points to make sure nobody skipped it. By the end of this video, you will know precisely what pushed Schwarzman across that identity line and what that 3 exclamation point rule actually protects. If breakdowns like this help you see business differently, subscribing costs nothing and tells us to keep making them, because what Schwarzman reveals about ambition, timing, and survival is not motivational noise, it is a blueprint, and most people watching this will only ever get the summary version. The strategic breakdown, the seed of unreasonable ambition. Let's rewind to where the story begins, because the mentor voice in this book does not start on Wall Street, it starts in a linen shop. Schwarzman grew up working inside his father's drapery and bedding business in the middle-class suburbs of Philadelphia, folding handkerchiefs and learning the rhythms of a small, stable operation. His father was content there, with no interest in competing with larger chains that would later dominate the industry, and that satisfaction planted the first real tension of Schwarzman's life. Because young Stephen looked at that comfortable, modest success and felt something close to alarm. Why would you not go bigger when going bigger costs the same effort as staying small? That single observation, that a small business and a large one demand nearly identical sacrifice, became the seed of everything that followed. It is one of the most quietly brutal insights in this book because it strips away the comforting idea that ambition is optional once you understand the true cost of building anything. Ask yourself honestly, are you protecting a comfortable ceiling the way his father did, or are you willing to pay the identical price for something enormous instead? Schwarzman's answer came early, and it shaped every decision that followed, from the university he chose to the reputation he built for restless, occasionally abrasive intensity. He was not universally liked in those early years. People who move fast rarely are, and What It Takes never pretends otherwise. Inside the vault, we call this the Asymmetry Insight, the recognition that effort and reward are not linearly connected, and that most people quietly underprice their own ambition without ever running the actual math. Schwarzman ran that math instinctively, long before he had the resources to act on it, and that instinct would eventually pull him toward Wall Street, toward Lehman Brothers, and toward a training ground that would either sharpen him or destroy him completely. What happened next did both. It broke him down publicly, in front of senior partners who did not soften their criticism for anyone, and it rebuilt him into someone who could survive rooms far more hostile than that one. The next chapter of this story is where the real education begins, and it is considerably less comfortable than anything we have covered so far. The education of a deal maker. Now we move into the years that actually forged him, because Schwarzman has said in interviews that Lehman Brothers was where he learned the difference between knowing finance and mastering it. He described his best colleagues as people who never stopped doing the bottom-up fundamental analysis, who suffered the small indignities of early mistakes and treated every deal as a foundation. He was only 36 when Lehman was sold, and by then, he had already survived scrutiny that ends most careers early. One case from this period captures the whole education. Late in 1978, Schwarzman received a call from the chief executive of Tropicana regarding a potential acquisition, and he was invited onto the board to advise on the offer already on the table from an acquiring company. He traveled through a snowstorm to reach the meeting, arrived exhausted, and still had to assess complex financial structures on the spot, in front of people who were watching for any sign of weakness. That is the part most summaries skip. Real deal-making rarely looks like calm boardroom footage. It looks like exhaustion, incomplete information, and a clock that refuses to slow down. Schwarzman has said plainly that these were the moments where craft was actually built, not in a classroom. And inside that Tropicana meeting is a lesson most ambitious professionals never learn until it costs them something expensive. Competence under pressure is not a personality trait. It is a rehearsed skill built through repetition. Schwarzman was building that skill years before anyone called him a titan of finance. And the discipline he developed here is exactly what he would need for the larger gamble waiting on the other side of Lehman Brothers. Because leaving a stable, prestigious firm to build something from nothing is never as clean as the highlight reel suggests, and it rarely happens for reasons anyone predicts in advance. Sometimes the exit is not chosen so much as it is finally accepted, and the next chapter of this breakdown shows exactly how uncomfortable that leap into the unknown actually was for a man with everything to lose, the billion-dollar gamble. So here's where Blackstone actually begins, and it starts with a disagreement between two partners. When Schwarzman and his co-founder Pete Peterson set out to raise their first private equity fund, Peterson wanted to ask for $50 million, a cautious number, the kind of ask that lets you prove yourself slowly. Schwarzman refused. He wanted $1 billion, an amount that was almost unheard of for a firm with no track record, no completed deals, and no institutional history behind its name. The vault perspective on this is different from most retellings of this story. Schwarzman's reasoning was not reckless bravado, it was cold arithmetic. He realized they would be calling the exact same investors regardless of the number, the same effort, the same relationships, the same paperwork. If the work required was identical, why would you deliberately request less? That single reframing, that fundraising difficulty does not scale down with ambition, is one of the sharpest financial insights in this book. Picture the actual room. 33 investors, each arriving with their own team of lawyers, each one needing convincing that an unproven firm deserved a historically large first fund. That is not a pitch deck moment. That is months of grinding, skeptical negotiation, where a single wrong answer could end the entire enterprise before it started. Did they actually believe it would work, or did they simply refuse to consider the alternative? Blackstone eventually closed that first fund at $800 million, short of the billion Schwarzman wanted, but still an almost unthinkable amount for a firm with their history. And the closing date of that fund carries a weight that most readers do not appreciate until they know what happened next. Because September of 1987 saw stock markets hitting record highs, and Schwarzman grew uneasy watching the market's confidence outpace his own instincts. Something felt wrong beneath the surface of all that optimism, a quiet unease he could not fully justify with numbers alone. That unease is where the next chapter of this breakdown begins, and it may be the single most tense, high-stakes sequence in the entire book, the discipline of survival. But here's the truth that separates people who talk about discipline from those who practice it when everything is on the line. Most people never find out what they actually believe until the moment belief is the only asset they have left. This is the moment where the mentor voice in this book turns sharp, almost cold, because timing decisions like this one are the difference between legend and footnote. Watching the markets climb through September of 1987, Schwarzman pushed hard to finalize every legal detail of Blackstone's first fund, refusing to let momentum slow the process down. His own words are blunt. Time wounds all deals, sometimes even fatally, and the longer you wait, the more surprises await you. They closed the fund on October 15, 1987. 4 days later, on October 19th, the Dow Jones Industrial Average collapsed by 508 points, one of the most violent single-day crashes in market history. Had Blackstone closed even a week later, the entire fund, possibly Schwarzman's entire career, could have evaporated before it truly began. This was not luck dressed up as skill. It was urgency applied at precisely the moment it mattered most. Sit with that for a second. 4 days. That is the entire margin between building an empire and becoming a cautionary footnote in someone else's book. This is where the confrontational edge of the story sharpens, because Schwarzman has never allowed himself the comfortable lie that timing is luck. He treats timing as a skill you train, the same way you train negotiation or analysis, and his rules for work and life reflect that obsession with protecting downside before chasing upside. Somewhere in that list of 25 rules sits a single line marked with 3 exclamation points, the only rule in the entire book to carry that emphasis. Don't lose money. That is the full instruction, blunt and unadorned, and it governs every disciplined decision Blackstone has made since. This is where mainstream advice collapses, because most business content glamorizes upside while quietly ignoring the unglamorous discipline of simply refusing to bleed out. Schwarzman built an empire on refusing exactly that. But the empire was never the destination. It was a platform, and what Schwarzman built on top of it may be the most revealing part of the entire story. The architecture of an empire. By the time Blackstone had survived its first crash and its first decade, Schwarzman faced a choice most successful founders never consciously make: keep closing deals himself or start designing the institution that closes deals without him. He chose the second, and that distinction, Dealmaker versus architect, is the blade this breakdown has been sharpening toward the whole time. In a McKinsey interview on the Inside the Strategy Room podcast, he explained that founding a business differs fundamentally from simply running one, because a founder must design the culture and the standards before any revenue exists to justify them. That scale never happened by accident. He has spoken openly about hiring only exceptional people, refusing to settle for competent when excellent was available, because mediocrity compounds just as relentlessly as excellence does, only backward. This is the same unforgiving standard that shaped his early career at Lehman, now turned outward onto every hire and every deal Blackstone considered. The empire was never really about money. It was about refusing, at every stage, to accept less than the standard he set for himself in that linen shop. And here, right where the story could comfortably end, on the image of a completed empire, there is a deeper layer most readers miss entirely. Schwarzman did not stop at building Blackstone. He built Schwarzman Scholars, a scholarship program in China, modeled on the ambition of the Rhodes Scholarship, designed to train the next generation of global leaders the same way Lehman and Blackstone had trained him, through pressure, through exposure, through standards that refuse to soften. That pivot matters because it reveals what this book has actually been building toward beneath the surface. The deeper layer most readers miss is that Schwarzman was never only building companies, he was building people capable of carrying enormous responsibility without collapsing under it, which is precisely the responsibility this channel exists to help you carry too. The blade in this story never dulls, from the linen shop to the trading floor to classrooms on the other side of the world. Key lessons and insights. Go big or stay comfortable. Let's pull the first real lesson directly to the surface, because Schwarzman's own words remain the clearest version of it. It is as easy to do something big as it is to do something small, so reach for a goal worthy of your actual capability, not the safest number available. This is not reckless ambition. It is the recognition that fundraising, hiring, and building all cost roughly the same effort regardless of scale, so underpricing your own ambition simply leaves value unclaimed. Apply this literally this week. Take whichever goal you have quietly shrunk out of fear and rewrite it at the size it actually deserves. Then ask what specifically would need to be true for that larger version to succeed. Most people never do this exercise because it forces them to confront how much smaller they have been playing than their actual capability allows. And that confrontation is uncomfortable, but it is also exactly where every serious transformation begins. Protect the downside before you chase the upside. Remember the number we opened with, followed by 3 exclamation points buried inside Schwarzman's own list of rules. Don't lose money. That instruction sounds almost embarrassingly simple, yet it is the single discipline separating firms that survive market collapses from firms that vanish inside them. Because upside excites people while downside protection requires unglamorous, boring vigilance that nobody applauds until the crash actually arrives. Build this into your own decisions immediately by asking, before any commitment of money or time, what is the actual worst case here, and can I survive it comfortably? If the honest answer is no, the opportunity is not worth the exposure regardless of how attractive the potential reward looks on paper. This single filter, applied consistently, will quietly outperform almost every aggressive growth strategy over a long enough timeline. Master the craft before you chase the title. Remember that snowstorm, that half-frozen boardroom, that moment Schwarzman had to think clearly while everyone waited to see if he deserved to be there. That is where this lesson actually lives. Schwarzman has said plainly that the best executives are made, not born, and that they never stop studying the people and organizations around them who have achieved genuine durable success. His own foundation was built through unglamorous bottom-up analysis at Lehman Brothers, the kind of repetitive, detailed work that builds real competence long before anyone hands you a prestigious title to match it. This week, identify the one foundational skill inside your field that everyone skips because it feels beneath their ambition, and spend real focused hours mastering it anyway. Titles are rented, borrowed from whichever organization currently employs you, But craft is owned permanently, and it travels with you into every room you ever walk into for the rest of your career. Timing is a discipline, not a feeling. 4 days, that is still the number to hold on to. The gap between Blackstone's fund closing and the 1987 market crash was not luck. It was the direct result of Schwarzman treating urgency as a skill worth training deliberately, refusing to let comfortable momentum replace disciplined execution. Time wounds all deals, sometimes fatally, and the professionals who internalize that truth close things while everyone else is still admiring the paperwork. Identify one commitment you have been quietly stalling on right now, the one you tell yourself you are simply being careful about. Set a firm date this week and move toward closing it with real urgency, because the surprises waiting on the other side of delay are rarely kind ones. And the market, like life, does not wait for you to feel ready before it changes completely. Build people, not just companies. And that brings us to the first question we started with, the identity-shifting moment that convinced Schwarzman he was allowed to think in billions rather than thousands. That shift was never really about the size of the number. It was the realization that building something enormous requires designing culture and standards before there is any revenue to justify them, and that principle applies whether you are building a company, a team, or simply yourself. If you leave with nothing else from this video, let it be this. Schwarzman's true legacy was never Blackstone's balance sheet. It was Schwarzman Scholars, the institution he built specifically to train other ambitious people the way he himself was trained. Whatever you are building right now, ask whether it is designed to outlast you and whether it is training the people around you to eventually surpass what you accomplished alone. The vault closing. There is a version of the story that ends with a number, nearly $1 trillion in assets, and that version misses everything that actually matters about what it takes. The real story is about a man who looked at his father's comfortable, modest success and refused to accept that ceiling for himself, then spent 5 decades proving that refusal was not arrogance. It was clarity about what effort genuinely costs regardless of ambition size. Here is your 7-day action, stated plainly. Choose one goal you have quietly shrunk to avoid the discomfort of real ambition. Write it down at its true size and identify the single largest obstacle standing between you and taking the first real step toward it. Do not wait for permission or perfect conditions, because Schwarzman never received either, and the discipline he built protecting downside while chasing outsized upside is available to you starting today, not someday. Remember the second question we opened with tonight, the one about that single line marked with 3 exclamation points inside his own rules. Don't lose money. That warning was never really about wealth alone. It was about protecting your ability to keep playing the game long enough for ambition to compound into something real. If this breakdown gave you something worth carrying, like this video, subscribe to the Book Vault and tell us in the comments the one lesson you are applying first.